All right, let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. What do you say? A lot of people get concerned about or start asking questions about the test that we're going to be doing tomorrow at the end of class. Okay? The test is it's more appropriately a knowledge metric. It's all based on things that we discussed here in class as part of the slide presentation or general discussion that we do. Okay, so if you've paid attention, you shouldn't have too many issues with it. For those that are just going for certification, it's 20 questions, 10 multiple choice, 10 true false, open book, open notes, just not open neighbor, okay? And passing score is a 70, okay? The certification is pass fail. For those of you that are taking the class from me at UAT, it is scored like anything else, and of course expect you to do well. So you might want to study just a hair tonight, look over the stuff we talked about, because it'll be graded just like anything else. If you miss one, it's a 95. You miss two, it's a 90.
Time limit?
There is no set time limit. Most people are done between 20 and 40 minutes. Okay, but 10 questions, 20 questions, 10 multiple choice, 10 true false, and open book, open notes. Okay, so that'll help you to set your mind for what you need tomorrow. It's not meant to be like a CISSP test. Okay, it's meant to be something that is just measures your ability to pay attention and apply the methodology. Okay, hopefully that helps some of you as we get ready to roll. What we're going to do tomorrow morning is we'll do a quick review of what we talked about today, so that everybody's kind of baseline and can get your brain set for first thing in the morning. So please, as best you can, be here around 8:30. Be here at 8:30. So if you have some traffic issues, try to leave just a little bit earlier to get here on time. Okay. That way we can get through the review, everybody's baseline, and we can do Module 3 first thing in the morning. Okay. Where are we at right now? We're in the second half of Module 2. Okay. Woohoo! We have, with our customer, we have spent some quality time with them working out our information criticality, understanding what information is critical, understanding how that relates to the organization by developing the impacts, those definitions, high, mediums, and lows, with them, and putting it all together into a picture, which is that matrices, the information criticality matrices. Okay, that reflects the organizational level. Well, now we get to start thinking about the systems side. What systems process, transmit, and or store that critical information? Okay. But first, we want to make sure that we have an understanding of the customer's security goals, if they have any yet. Okay. Part of what we have to do with the customer is spend some time understanding where they need to be from a security perspective. What are their security objectives and goals? Okay, part of that's going to come from the information that you get from talking with them. Part of that's going to be driven by helping them to understand what regulatory requirements they fall under, what industry-specific policies and procedures they fall under. Okay, because every industry likes to govern itself and will have some different policies and procedures and documentation that goes along with it as well. Okay? So we have to spend some time up front understanding where they need to be and helping them to understand where they need to be from a security perspective. Some of the different places where we can get some of this information can be driven by the architecture, the industry, the laws, the regulations, the environment they're working in. State laws will drive some things. Federal law will drive some things. Okay? As we talk about here, organizational policy, what do they have established within themselves? And then are there things established on the federal level, state level, that drives the different considerations they have to incorporate? All right. Other places you might get it, there might be some local policies and procedures. There may be some other directives that they have to fall under. There could be some industry best practices that have been identified to them from either their cohorts, other relationships, or industry forums, or something of that nature that will drive some of these things. Okay, so you're going to be asking lots of questions, pulling in information. It's going to be very helpful, I would say essential, that somebody on your team is somewhat of an expert in the industry of the organization that you're doing the assessment on. Okay, so if you go in to do a bank and you have nobody there with banking experience, you're going to have a difficult time. Because you're going to need to understand the rules associated with banking, plus you're going to have to make sure you're speaking the same language. Because you will go into places where the terminology will be significantly different, especially if you roll from the DoD world out into the commercial world. If I use an acronym from the DoD world in the commercial world, eyes either glaze over or they think it's something else and it's not associated with what I think it is. So you have a communication issue. So there has to be a good melding there of an understanding of the industry. Okay, so that's critical, pulling it together. Okay, we're still in the scoping process. We're trying to understand what is the level of effort it's going to take to accomplish the assessment. What are the limits we're going to have associated with it? What are the time frames that are going to be associated with it? So this is part of the coordination process. Be upfront with the customer about the needs of your team and have them be upfront with you about the needs of their organization. Okay, we're still trying to manage customer expectations. Okay, so we now get the opportunity to look at the system side of things. Okay, we went through all that work to identify critical information. Well, now we get to go through and identify the systems that process, transmit, and or store that critical information. Okay. Those theoretically are critical systems, right? Okay. Hopefully, you can get a good definition of what a critical system is. Do you know what is one document you can look in to try to help guide you a little bit on critical system side? Disaster recovery plan, business continuity plans, typically will prioritize the restoration of critical systems. So it's a good place to start and have a conversation. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will match up to what you ultimately end up here. And one of the findings that you generally have is align your disaster recovery planning, business continuity planning with the end results of this. Okay, so they tie together closely, but it can be a starting point of information. Okay, so we want to understand where are the systems that process, transmit, and or store that critical information. Okay, so we're going to give an example, still continuing on with our COPS folks. All right, so we have our organizational information criticality matrix that we developed. It should look familiar. It's only been a couple hours, right? Now we get to identify what systems are out there. Okay, and yes, NSA does another quantum leap on you here. They throw out and say, suddenly we've got 2 systems. Okay, well, what's going to really happen? You're going to analyze with the customer their architecture, how they have things implemented, where functionally do they have boundaries, error marks, the systems defined. Okay? Remember, a system isn't necessarily a single box. That's not necessarily a system. It's really a component or a group of components that do a similar function. Okay? So, for example, the fax system isn't necessarily one box, but it's a group of things working together to actually accomplish a function. Okay, that's what we're defining a system as. Okay, otherwise, you might have 1,000 systems you'd be developing system criticality matrices for. That's not the purpose. We're not trying to create that much pain. What we're trying to create is an understanding of how things can be lumped together to do a similar function. And that's what we're calling a system. All right. So NSA throws out 2 systems here. And the Federal Agents Comprehensive Tracking System, FACS, just the FACS, man. Right? Come on. Yeah, you tried. All right, the Secret Network of Operational Programs, or SNOOP. All right, so those are the 2 systems we're defining out of this. Now, in the real world, there's probably going to be more. Okay, these are just for example purposes. And so, to create the system criticality matrices, it's as simple as taking the organizational criticality matrix, analyzing the system that you're working with, and determining which of the critical information items are being processed, transmitted, or stored on that critical system. Okay, so in this example, your analysis, you have to bring in expertise, your analysis would go through and say, okay, we have all the items except for informants under facts. So 3 of the 4 information criticality items are being processed, transmitted, or stored in facts. So what you literally do is copy the row down and paste it into the system criticality matrix. Okay? So we did criminal records, we did investigations, and we did warrants. Okay. Everybody see that? It's so simple, it's confusing. Okay. It's a cut and paste of the row that applies to that system. Everybody good? All right. And then you can do a system high water mark or system information criticality. So for facts, the highest one is a medium, so a medium. Highest is a high, medium. Okay, so that's your system criticality. Do the same thing for Snoop. Through your analysis, okay, the only one being processed, transmitted, or stored is the informant's information. So it's a 1-row copy, and you have your Snoop information criticality matrix, or system criticality matrix. And then, of course, you have the Snoop information criticality, which is just a line because it's a one-liner. Everybody see that? Okay, so that's all through your analysis. All right, so there's them together. All right, now something interesting can happen, like you actually finally get a network diagram. All right, and you get this comes out on a napkin after a beer at the bar in the evening, right? We've literally had that happen, where the guy that was responsible for all the systems of an organization that had just acquired, or basically existed because they had acquired 52 other organizations over a period of about 3 years. And you can imagine they're all well integrated, right? All 52 of the systems. He said it was so complex he couldn't keep any network diagrams going, but what he did was he literally drew on a napkin the network structure as it existed as of that day, all from his head. Okay, that's that whole if you get hit by a bus syndrome, right? You lose a lot. Well, that was a case. That was a finding. We liked the guy, but it was a finding. Anyways, you get your network diagram, and through some analysis, you might determine there might be some new information that you did not understand before. Okay? And because of that new information, you might need to make a change to a system criticality matrix. All right? So just as a quick glance, we look at this. You know, we know there's informants information. We know that's important. We have investigation information. We had warrants information. I forget the other one off the top of my head. Okay, records, informants, investigations, and warrants. Okay, so all that's encompassed in here. Here's our fax net. Remember, we defined it as fax system. And we see how it integrates with investigations, and yeah, personnel is important. We mentioned that before. Warrants. All right, so then we look at SnoopNet. Let's see, we got the informants that ties together, and the field sites can access that. Ew, what's that?
Firewall?
Yeah, that's a hole in a firewall. With information coming from the warrants database. Did we address that in our previous system criticality matrix? No, we did not. Okay, so we asked some questions. We try to understand what's going on here. And we determined that, oh yeah, warrants information is tying into the informant's information. And so that reflects a change that needs to occur. Okay, so now that we've accounted for that, we now put in the warrants line off of the main one because it is part of the SnoopNet. And you can have information types cross multiple systems. That's okay. Through further analysis, it might be determined that maybe availability of that warrants information is going to be more important to us because of the potential of loss of life of our informants if we don't get the right things coordinated. Okay, this is just an example of change. Don't get hung up in the details. I'm making this up too, okay? So if things do change, though, just remember, if you change it here, it has to reflect back through the process. Okay, so if you make a change down here on Snoop, make sure it makes it back into the organizational side, and make sure it makes it back to any other affected ones that are out there. Okay? So it's just an example of change. Change will occur. Trust me. All right? Okay, so now we need to go through and define the system security environment. Where is it today? What do they have in place from an architectural view? What kind of systems do they have in place? Where are their intrusion detection systems? Where are their firewalls? What is a good source of information for that? Network diagrams, system diagrams, plus the system administration staff. They're going to have that kind of information. We need to be able to draw a good picture of what their system security environment is. We also need to look at the documentation that exists on how their environment is supposed to be defined. Okay? If you have ever done any work with the Department of Defense, they have more documentation than, they kill more trees than any place you would ever imagine. Okay? But they have to, because of all the requirements they have to do certification and accreditation and various other documenting activities, concepts of operations, how are the systems supposed to function? Well, if commercial world had half the documentation as the DoD, they'd be much better off because they would at least have defined how they're supposed to be. Okay, but a lot of times they don't have that stuff in place. Obviously, any diagrams and schematics are going to be useful too, but we need a good snapshot of where their architecture is, what is their environment like right now. And that's a combination of drawings, documentation, etc. Okay, we also need to understand what logical and physical boundaries exist. Okay, what is a physical boundary? Give me some different physical boundaries. A door?
Just addresses.
Separation, building, two buildings, okay. Think physical security for a second. Man-trap, gates, fences, walls, okay. What's the main factor that all those have in common? I can reach out and touch it, right? It physically exists. Okay, it's something that physically exists. Well, what is a logical boundary? Okay, the rules in the firewalls. The firewalls themselves are just a box. But yeah, the firewall's rule sets. What else?
User access.
Okay, yeah. User access. What else? Segregated networks. Okay. ACLs, yeah. Okay. So logical boundaries, you can't necessarily reach out and touch them, but they still help to control access, functionality, things that you can do within the environments. Okay. When you go out to do an assessment, you think it's important to understand your physical boundaries and your logical boundaries? The answer is yes. Absolutely, it's important. You need to understand where you can and cannot go physically in their environment, in the customer's environment. There may be limitations as to where you can and cannot go. It may be related to classification levels. It may be related to ownership of a certain area. Okay? And you also need to understand, are there logical boundaries? Especially if you go off to do evaluations, if you actually do this technical scanning. Logical boundaries play a huge role in that because you do not want to scan places that you are not allowed. Okay? You start to violate the terms of your own contract. All right? And you may break a few laws while you're at it. All right? So you need to definitely understand where your physical boundaries and your logical boundaries are. Even on the assessment side, where does ownership start and stop for different aspects of the organization? Okay? Could be this division is responsible for this area. This division is responsible for this area. And oh, by the way, this area over here is a tenant area and it's off limits to you guys. It's not part of the assessment. Okay. So we need to understand those things. All right, so understand your boundaries. It's part of the scoping process. Okay. Now, being in the world that I am, over the last 18 years or so, I've encountered this many times. Security, everybody, it's a buzzword, right? Everybody understands it's important. But don't make it inconvenient for me, right? Is that possible? You can control it, but people have to take responsibility. Okay, and everybody in an organization has some level of responsibility for helping to implement security within those environments. Okay, and they need to understand that. But we need to all play well in the sandbox together, right? In order to effectively implement a security program. Okay, we also have to understand there are constraints that we'll have to deal with. Okay, you'll have constraints that are related to your physical and logical boundaries. You're also going to have constraints that might be related to the recommendations that you're ultimately going to give. Okay, it could be financial constraints. It could be resource limitation constraints. One of the statements we've had with one customer was, you know what, we want good recommendations, but understand any recommendation you make that involves us adding any bodies to our environment, we will not be able to implement. Well, is that a countermeasure constraint? Is that a recommendation constraint? Absolutely. And we need to understand those up front. We ask questions. And there might be a few constraints that are created because of the environment that you're working in. Okay? And here's a little clip that might demonstrate that.
Oh no, I got that meeting in 5 minutes. Sue, I forgot about the big specs meeting in 5 minutes. Can you help?
No problem. I'll bring Sandy. She's an expert on the specs.
A spec meeting. No problem. Glad to help.
Hope we're not late.
I think we've got time.
Did you guys say something?
Okay. Have any of you ever experienced that before? Okay, I'll admit I'm guilty of that one. Okay, Russ and I's offices are right next to each other, and we spend more time on trillion, encrypted IM basically, than we do talking to each other. All right. Well, it's the nature of us geeks. We can actually type better than we can talk most of the time. But those are some constraints you might run into. It's an environmental constraint. It's things that are implemented. We have actually had customers say, we understand there are security issues with AIM. Okay, instant messaging. But we have to have it. Well, why? Well, we communicate better that way. Okay, well, that's a constraint that we have to deal with. Now, we can make recommendations on how they can improve the usage by maybe using a different product like an encrypted IM to at least protect the communication that's going to cross. But there are things that you will run into like that. All right? So just understand you're going to run into some interesting things in some environments. Okay, you're going to make a request for documentation. Okay, normally what we do is we make a request before we even come on site to begin with. Okay, we say, hey, there's a list of documents that would be helpful for us in doing the assessment. Sometimes we will get some of those before the assessment starts. Sometimes we will not. But if we're on site with the customer, we make that request again. And we may be adding some name or adding some document titles to that as we understand their environment better and understand what documentation they may actually have out there. Get your hands on any documentation you can. You'll work through it. You'll sift through it. You'll set the stuff aside that doesn't really apply to what you need, but it's better to have too much than not enough. Okay? That's why you have team members with certain areas of expertise so you can sift through a majority of that. All right, so get that documentation requested. Make sure you track it. When did you get it, or when did you request it? When did you get it? Who gave it to you? And when did you give it back? Okay, so make sure you have a tracking mechanism throughout the entire process. Because some of that documentation may be considered sensitive. So you want it managed and controlled throughout your entire assessment.
You're going to mention internet. Do you do any type of internet searches before you?
We absolutely do as part of the initial information gathering. Anytime you do an assessment and evaluation, if somebody from a company or an organization calls us and says, we want to have you do this, we'll just search around for publicly available information to begin with. It's a key part of penetration testing, because that may be the only information you get is what can you gather from a public perspective. And when we're looking at the technology side of evaluations, or the technical scanning side of evaluations, we always try for publicly available information to validate address ranges and things like that, so that we don't accidentally scan somebody we're not supposed to. But yeah, you can gather a lot of information
Just
that way.
Bios and things like that from people that you're going to be dealing with before you even
But
go out there.
bios, org charts, anything that's going to help you to have a better understanding of the organization and its structure and its mission as you get on site. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so all this stuff that you have gathered up to this point has to be documented somewhere. Okay? That document is going to be called the assessment plan. Okay, the assessment plan essentially is a scoping document. All right? You're going to put all the stuff you found so far, not from a vulnerability perspective, but information about the customer, the critical information, the critical systems, your definitions you did for high, medium, and low, all that's going to be plugged into the assessment plan. Because what you're trying to ultimately do as you're leaving the site, before you start your on-site activities, which is Module 3, the next phase, you want to make sure you have a complete record of everything that you've discussed and agreed to with the customer, and ultimately get a signed document saying, yeah, that's us. And we agree to the approach that you're going to use to accomplish the assessment. Okay. So that's what the assessment plan essentially is. It documents everything, and it also becomes an agreement between you and the customer. Okay. Just a quick outline for that. You're going to have a section on points of contact. This section includes your folks and the customers. Okay, so the team that's going to be there from your organization and the customer contacts that you have, especially the customer representative. We're talking names, phone numbers, addresses, email addresses, IM accounts, preferably encrypted. PGP keys are helpful if you want to pass sensitive information through regular email, that type of thing. But you've got to come to agreement with the customers how that communication is actually going to occur. Okay. Obviously, when you start putting this information in there, this document needs to be protected as sensitive, your assessment plan, okay, because you're going to have contact information in there, and you're going to have a lot of information about the customer themselves. The mission of the organization you're doing the assessment on. Okay, what is the purpose of their existence? Who do they support? How do they support it? It's going to be not only the one nice paragraph that they paid $10,000 for somebody to write that is their mission statement. Okay, that's the public-facing one, but what about what they really do and what are they trying to accomplish on the inside? Okay, so you're going to have a combination mission statement, the public-facing but also the internal types of mission focus that they have. Okay, and they can be different. The organizational information criticality, you've done this, right? That's what we did for exercise number 1. Okay, so that gets plugged in there with the definitions. System information criticality, this is what you get to do next, all right? But you're going to include that, that information based on what you find with the customer. Where are the systems and what is the criticality matrices that are developed out of that. Any customer concerns and constraints, okay? Customer concerns, okay, you're brought there for a reason. Okay, so maybe their concern is they need to be prepared for an audit. Or maybe their concern is they might not meet SOX requirements or something of that nature. Okay, well, those would go in the concerns section. Any constraints, any limitations to your ability to conduct the assessment get documented in here as well. Okay, so be sure to list the constraints. System configuration, that's driven by, a lot of times, by our network diagrams. Pictures are still worth 1,000 words. But you also want some description around what is the technologies in use. So Windows 2003 server, Windows XP workstations, Windows 3.1 whatever, old stuff. Or you just want a description of what the environment is. And that can get run to a paragraph or two. Okay, what are their firewalls? What types are they? What are their intrusion detection systems? What types are they? What versions are they? Are helpful as well, because that'll give us some good information. Okay, so you do a good system configuration description and drawings. Question a lot of times comes up, well, what if they don't have any network diagrams? Well, we do the best we can to put together a logical network diagram based on our understanding at a snapshot in time, obviously. And there's caveats underneath saying as a blah blah date from blah 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 that's where the drawing would come from. Okay, and you try to validate that as much as you can with your contacts. But in 90% of the cases, we definitely have a network diagram based on our understanding, but it's a logical diagram. Okay. Individuals and positions to be interviewed. Okay. You're going to want a good cross-section of the organization that you're going to actually be looking for security posture information from. All right, so you're going to list those people to get an understanding of, or so that they're prepared to actually do the interviews when they come back on site. Okay. What kind of people would you like to talk to?
Anybody from regular users to system administrators?
Okay, anywhere from regular users to system administrators, absolutely. So a good cross-section. Who do you think you're going to spend the most time with? Who do you want to spend the most time with?
In between people, the ones that can talk to upper management.
Okay.
Probably all the department heads.
Okay. All right. Well.
Network engineer or the security officer.
Okay. We normally break it out a little more generic than that and call it operations level. Okay. Because it depends on the organization as to what they actually call the people. But you're probably going to want to spend the majority of your time at the operations level because they're the ones that have to implement stuff from above, and the other stuff that flows from below they have to deal with as well. Right? They're the lifeblood of the organization to keep systems operational, to keep them secure, to keep the environment in some organized way, positive way, getting the architecture in place. So we generally spend the majority of our time in the operations level, which is like our system administrators, security administrators, those types of folks. It could also be operations managers because they handle the political side of it, which is important also. You also don't want to ignore the user base, okay? Because user base has some critical information in terms of what they have to deal with on a daily basis, how they actually get things accomplished. And they may not necessarily match the policies that are in place, if there are any policies in place. Okay. And you also want to gain the information from the senior level management, but keep in mind that like the C staff, all those folks are probably the people you talk to in the pre-assessment phase, because this is actually listing it out for the on-site portion. Okay. So the senior level managers are probably providing you the information about how they envision the organization functioning. Okay? And what you're doing is now diving in, once we get on site, and understanding how the organization is actually functioning from a security perspective. So you'll want to talk to some of those folks, but you're probably going to gain true posture information from operations level down. And then documentation. Okay? Yes, documentation is very important through the entire process. We want to make sure they have documentation to cover the critical security concerns, security elements within the organization. Okay? So we want to make sure that that's listed, tracked, et cetera, and that can be done here. What is some of the documents you would like to see as part of any kind of assessment? Okay, policies?
Systems info.
What's that?
Systems information.
Okay, systems information.
The network Bible, if there's one like that.
Okay, some kind of network Bible, whatever the appropriate term for that.
Documentation for the network layout. So.
Okay, all documentation for network layout, configuration, information, etc. Okay, what else?
Disaster recovery.
Disaster recovery planning, business continuity plans. Yeah. What else?
Org charts.
Org charts. Okay, show where things fit within the organization. What about firewall rule sets? Okay, yeah, we're not running scans against the firewall, but can we take a look at the rule sets? Sure. Okay. What about incident response plans? Those type of reporting procedures. Okay. You can get a fairly large list of things that you can request as part of it. Appendix E and Appendix F show people and documentation that you might request as part of this. Remember that when you request, especially documentation, you be careful of your terminology, and you might need to define it a couple of different ways, because we've gone into organizations say, can we review your disaster recovery plan? Well, we don't have one of those. Come to find out they have a business continuity plan, but it's called something different, so they didn't recognize it or pay attention to it, what we were actually asking for. So there's also opportunities to discover things they say that don't exist, even with the name that you provided them. We went into an organization, they said they have no security policies whatsoever. This is that same group that had been built up based on 52 separate organizations. Well, you can imagine it's pretty much a nightmare trying to integrate all those together. They said they had no security policy whatsoever. And part of what you do is observation. You pay attention to what's around you while you're doing an assessment. And out of the corner of my eye, on somebody's desk was this thing that went down and said, corporate security policy. Okay, we were told it didn't exist. So I acquired it legally and reviewed it, and it was way out of date, but they had something. They had a starting point. And it just, people don't realize they have certain things, especially when you start to bring diverse groups together into one bigger organization. You can have a lot of disconnects. And that's another reason why assessments are done sometimes too, is how can you bring it all together? How can you help an organization to function better, get organized better from a security perspective? Okay. So that's the documentation. We want to include a timeline of events, and what we're trying to do here is manage customer expectations. Where did we start from? Where are we today? And where are we going? And when can we expect to reach our goals? Okay, that's all a timeline does for you. Help you to manage customer expectations, and of course to plan for what you need to accomplish. But use this as a tool for the customer. Okay? All right, so that's, as you get ready to leave the pre-assessment site visit, you should have the assessment plan drafted. Okay, so you're busy at night. It's not an 8-hour-a-day job while you're on site doing a pre-assessment. You're working several hours into the night as well. So you have a draft of the pre-assessment plan so it can be being reviewed while you're heading home and doing this pre-assessment preparation, okay, which was that second piece on our timeline. All right. And hopefully you can get all that finalized before you come back on site. Now, as I said, you don't always have the luxury of this piece of it. You don't always get the chance to leave on Friday and come back 4 weeks later. Sometimes as you finish the pre-assessment on Friday, you start the assessment on Monday, the on-site portion. Okay, so you just have to understand customer expectations. Okay, this is a chance where we can address the need for additional team members based on information we've collected. Gets us a chance to review our documentation, do a little bit of pre-analysis, and any site coordination we need to do. Okay, we've already had that discussion. We've already had that discussion. Okay, so the pre-assessment summary. We addressed, as part of the pre-assessment process, the need to collect information and understand the organization based on their mission, what information is critical, what systems are critical, and to ultimately come together with a documented agreement as to how the actual on-site portions are going to be conducted. Okay? We want to make sure we gather as much documentation as we can in this process as well. All right, this is your last thing for today. Okay? What you're going to be doing is outlining highlight outlining your pre-assessment plan or your assessment plan. And as you go through this process, recognize there are some things that you already have. All right? You're going to make up points of contact. You can use me if you want. The mission of the organization, based on your paragraph description, you should be able to pull out a mission of the organization. All right? So that shouldn't take you more than a couple minutes. You already have your organization criticality matrix. What you're going to do is go to Appendix G, find your organization's logical diagram, and decide what 1 to 2 to 3 systems actually exist in that environment. And then you're going to build a system criticality matrix for each of those systems that you decide exist, okay, based out of the organizational. Number 5, you're going to leave blank your customer concerns and constraints, because I'm going to give you that tomorrow as part of your final group exercise. Okay, so you just leave that blank now. System configuration information, you should be able to do a quick description based on the network diagram in Appendix G. Individuals to be interviewed and documents to be reviewed. You can probably take the easy way out and reference Appendix E and Appendix F. All right?